Hello.
Hello. I'm Allie.
And I'm Andre.
And this is
The
Love is Blind podcast.
Ha, perfect.
When we are here, I know, I was like, we've been so good. I wasn't even going to comment, but
Yeah. But I had to.
I'm glad you did. You know, we don't take enough time to celebrate the wins.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we did win just now.
Yeah. We are here to discuss Love is Blind, season 7.
Episodes 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. Okay. Honest time, we were planning on doing the first batch of these
7 to 9.
and then the second batch of these 10 through
10
11.
to 11.
I was really
Andre was like pointing at me.
I was like, I like the way that worked out the first time. But we couldn't. Alas, life did not find a way, unlike
Take that, Jeff Goldblum.
Take that Jeff Goldblum's character in Jurassic Park.
Yeah.
Pork.
Jurassic Pork.
Jurassic
What a
Pork.
different movie that would be.
It was. I'm sure that there's a B-roll movie out there.
There must
called
be.
Jurassic Pork.
I feel like maybe starring like Porky Pig.
Porky Pig.
Or who was the kids, Looney Tune Kids pork guy? Whatever. He would be good in Jurassic Pork. Anyway, we got a lot of couples to get through.
Yeah. And
although we will end with much fewer than we start with.
I know. What a wild season this has been.
Whoa.
Okay. So, before we get started, just wanted to remind everybody to like and subscribe us everywhere on our social media. You can find us at Love is Blind Podcast on Instagram and Facebook. You can give us ratings on Spotify. You can give us ratings on Apple Podcasts and all the other stuff. Most importantly, if you can write us reviews on Apple Podcasts, that one seems to hold the most sway in the world of podcasts. So written reviews make a huge difference, not only just to us to make ourselves feel good for doing this thing, but also it makes sure that the podcast is more visible to other people. And I think something to always keep in mind is that whenever you're listening to podcasts like this, is that it makes a really big difference from little effort on your part. So if you are able to give us one of those likes, thumbs up, subscribe, makes a huge difference to us.
Yeah, it makes our day.
It does.
Yeah.
So anyway, now that we've got that out of the way, shall we dive right in?
Let's do it.
So we're thinking of talking about Steven and Monica.
Wow.
Yeah.
So after episode 6, they seem to be doing basically really well, except they had that fight where she thought he was talking too much. And at the time it was sort of like, okay, yeah, maybe. Yes, and
Yes, and?
It was a little bit like we hadn't seen enough of that to really know whether that was a thing.
Yeah.
In episode 7, they actually in both of the episodes that he's in, because he's not in episodes 9 and on, you really get a sense of just how much he talks.
Yeah.
He takes up a lot of space.
He does, and I think he thinks is being more insightful than he actually is much of the time. But the conversation that we start off in episode 7, where he's talking about, she's actually talking about the fact that when they were in the pods, he was saying how he was always going to get her flowers every day, and he kind of talks his way out of it by saying that that he was just using flowers as an example of how he'd be nice. And I mean, okay, cool. But then that means that there must be other things that take that place. And Steven, in response to Monica kind of saying that, that I thought you were going to buy me flowers and do all these things, he then kind of goes on this weird tangent where he's like, I don't know, marriage is really important. I don't want to have any doubts, but I don't want to take you all the way to the end and have doubts. She's like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
And she's just asking from him. She's just asking for like signs of affection, for love languages. I think she actually specifically calls out love languages.
Yeah.
As in that she expects
Gifts.
Gifts, I think, is her particular love language that she addresses in this case. But in either case, I think she's just expecting some signs of affection from him that he's not showing, other than what we certainly get a lot of, which is his interest in sex. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like we have to do the full what's up with them before I can really analyze.
Okay. So then we have the fireworks incident where they're at this
there's
gathering.
Cracks starting to form.
Yeah.
Right? The
And
flowers.
The flowers is one, and then
come on. Like, then we start getting into him talking about how, when he's famous, people are going to offer to suck his dick. And then an episode, so you get like this kind of preview of like, wow, sex really on this guy's mind.
Yeah.
And then in episode 8, it's like, whoa, the most explicit conversation about sex and the type of sex that I think I've ever seen on Love is Blind.
Yeah, and I think not only that, but just like the sort of revelation of his sense of, like, I'll put it in heavy quotes, his sense of humor and his approach to talking about sex, which seems to be, from my perspective, I was like, the way I thought about it was like, this seems ripped out of like a 90s male comic, like just shitty stand-up about like how women are complicated and they don't know their own, like you have to learn their combinations, and some women don't know their own combinations, and which gets a very deserved eye roll from Monica, who also asks him to maybe do a little less butt stabs, which, oh Jesus Christ.
Yeah, I was like, oh man. And then he makes this joke about comparing birth to a man having a cold.
Yeah.
And it's just like, oh my God.
Yeah, it's very.
He's going downhill fast.
It's very clear, yeah, and like there were obviously moments where Monica is acting, like during the fireworks thing, for example, she kind of comes back inside after the fireworks, and she was like, "Oh, wasn't that so romantic? How we just like, how I was hugging everyone else and not you," and she like has this like, kind of fake smile on her face, which at the time, my first thought was like, this is based on just the conversation about the flowers, this seems a little passive aggressive, but then putting it into the context of everything, I'm like, you know what, 100% totally on your side, Monica. Like, he is a bit of a shit, and a
bunch of a shit.
I mean, of course, then we get to like all the way down to the end, and we find out how much of a shit he is.
Yeah, that he was sexting with somebody else
while he was supposed to be doing a sleep study.
Purportedly doing a sleep study. I think the impression I had was that it was ambiguous as to whether he was even at the sleep study or whether he said that and was actually out having sex with somebody else.
Yeah.
And
I had, by the way, I read an article about how this actually came out, how she found that message.
Oh.
So apparently what happened was that he had come back from the sleep study, and he had gone to the bathroom, and then he got a text message on his phone, and she saw that the alert said it was from Garrett, and he was like, oh, you should answer Garrett. And so she grabbed his phone to open it up to talk to like respond to Garrett, and saw messages, and then opened it up and then read more. Which,
I see.
Yeah.
So when she opened the messages app, she saw all of these other messages.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Why'd you leave your phone? Why'd you give her your phone code, bro?
Yeah.
I mean, my overall impression is that this is a man who's totally unconnected from himself.
Yeah.
And I don't know fully why. I got the impression that he has perhaps some strong kinks.
Yeah.
And
I mean, she says that too, based on the messages that she was reading.
Right. Yeah. And maybe I don't want to kink shame at all. And like, if you haven't integrated that, I could see that bringing shame to a person if you have not integrated and accepted that. So I see a real split in him is what I'm trying to say. Like, there is the person in the pods who's really empathetic and understanding. And then there's the other side of him that's like disconnected from himself, that he doesn't know how to really be with. And I feel like he's been compartmentalizing his life a lot, and it kind of is coming to a head for him in this, that it's like that part of himself that he wants to identify with, that came on the show, wanted to get married, but he didn't know how to integrate all of this other part of him that is also part of him, and it all comes apart. Which, by the way, my trying to understand does not at all excuse what I think happened. I think he really, really hurt her, and I don't really have much to say about, I mean, Monica was direct about what she wanted. She tried to be patient with him.
Yeah.
She was growing increasingly irritated with him. So that's there, but it's, yeah, this is a man who's got to work some stuff out for himself.
Yeah. Quite a lot of just, lack of maturity from him, not only just in the way he behaved, but also just in a lot of the behavior that we're seeing in episode 8 from Steven. And the fact that he says at the end that he shouldn't have come on the show. And
yeah, he's right.
He's right. He shouldn't have. And, Monica is right to call him out on being selfish for taking this opportunity away from her. Monica is, because I think Garrett and Taylor are over when this argument is happening, because initially we see Taylor talking to Monica, but she calls him selfish for taking away this opportunity for her to actually find love based on the experiment that she was thinking she was in.
She's right. She's absolutely right.
And and honestly, probably all for the best that he then doesn't show up for the party that happens later on in episode 11.
I think he was,
or was it episode 10? I think
maybe I think he's like a person with a lot of shame, and it all came up for him, and he's probably spiraling at this point, or embracing his, I don't know what he's up to, but
his newfound fame.
Yeah,
I mean, it's very possible. I mean, I guess now
and
he's
then
going
feeling shame about that.
He's going to be getting all of those texts where people offer to suck his dick. But man, yeah. What a fall for Steven, because there was so much of early pods where I was like, look at this sweet man. He's just like smiling ear to ear. Whew.
Well, I mean, I kind of feel like that contributes to my theory that the version of him that he identified with was so good.
Yeah.
That there's no room for this other part, the shadow.
Yeah.
So they end things, and we learn later that Monica and he talked and hashed it out, and she bears him no ill will. And I think that is big of her.
It is big of her. But yeah. So long, Steven and Monica.
And speaking of another so long couple.
Well, let's not give spoilers.
Well, they've already seen it all.
But we move on to Alex and Tim. And when we begin episode 7, they're still getting over the fight that they had from episode 6, where Alex and Tim were walking away from that party they were at with all of the other couples, and they got into an argument where Alex didn't want to speak and Tim wanted her to speak, and episode 7 begins with her,
or vice versa, I think.
Yeah. But they ultimately go through some repair. It sounds like Alex kind of convinces Tim that that she deserves a second chance, and they seem to kind of repair. He seems to be willing to kind of give her that chance. Tim is continually very hard to read. He kind of returns to this kind of like baseline, very sort of like neutral face. I had a hard time reading him early
Yeah.
on to understand exactly how he was feeling.
He can go to a dissociative place.
Yeah. Well, it's not even. I think some of it is dissociating, and some of it is just like a specific image that he's cultivated. You know.
Interesting.
But in these episodes, we have these couples meet each other's families. Tim meets Alex's fam. We had that really sweet conversation where Tim reads the letter that he wrote for him, for the father when he was in the pods. He had given Alex that letter, and now he gets to actually read it to his face, and that was really sweet. I mean, that was like that nearly brought me to tears too, just because it was like such a. Yeah, it was like it sounded like a really heartfelt sentiment, and like you could see that it meant a lot to Alex's dad to hear those words, and kind of like to help him understand where the two of them are coming from. But that goes well. And then they see each other's places. Tim's super clean apartment with his lazy boy couches.
Mm-hmm. That he's intending to have someone else move in. It's very man vibe, though.
Very man vibe.
But then Alex's is a complete mess.
Yeah.
And I think Tim's like, oh, no. As I would be, too.
I liked when she pointed to the garbage bags as a sign of progress, where she was like, those are the garbage bags. And I was like, is that garbage? And she was like, I need to go through those and decide what I'm going to donate and what I'm going to throw out. And I'm like, okay. Isn't that what happens before they end up in the trash bags?
I think everyone has this thought. It's probably why they selected that clip. But yeah, that doesn't go that great.
Yeah.
And then in the next ep, Tim's parents meet Alex.
Yeah, and the actual meeting itself goes well. I think Tim's parents...
It seemed like it went well. Yeah.
Tim's parents give like some nice advice. Like his mom, ultimately says that I trust your instincts and your mind and your heart to make these decisions. And then the denouement, the sort of the way this turns out is a little unexpected, because we have Tim's just like sitting on the couch, and Alex comes home from work and is eating. Mm-hmm. And Tim is like, I want to talk to you. And she's like, I'm eating right now. And he's like, well, I want to talk to you. So she brings her food over. And he reveals that he is really upset that Alex went to sleep during his parents' visit. Mm-hmm. And the whole conversation kind of comes, like, it starts to break down and starts to be a little bit more than just that, but it starts to be more about expectations and communication.
Yeah.
And
she's saying, you have to communicate with me what you want and need. I can't read your mind.
Yeah.
And he says, if I'm the type of if I have to communicate even that to you, then we're not going to work out.
Yeah. And I have to say, oh man, because there's a big, from my perspective, there's a theme kind of happening in these episodes, and kind of this season a little bit, in the way the couples are breaking down, or what have you, which is emotional labor, right? Which is, for those of you who are unfamiliar, the emotional labor, like it involves a lot of things, but a big thing that it involves is having to think of whatever everything that needs to get done. Not actually the process of doing it, but actually thinking about the fact that it has to be done in the first place, right? And it's a sort of very common thing, unfortunately, in the world, that women often carry a large portion of emotional labor. Women often have to remind their male partners to do things, like, we'll talk about later when we're talking about Nick and Hannah and Ramses, but we're just kind of like having to like tell men to do a thing rather than having them be able to think of doing it themselves. And
you're referring to him not speaking to what he wants with this?
What I'm finding interesting is that this is a situation in which Tim is finding that he has to tell Alex a thing. He has to
she's not going to do the emotional labor.
That she's not doing the emotional labor, and that he has one instance of having, or like one or maybe two instances of having to do emotional labor, and he calls it quits. He's like, if I have to, I left a dish in the sink, and when I came back, it was still there. If I have to be the one to tell you to wash your dishes, I don't want to be married to you. that's kind of what he says. I mean, not kind of. It is what he says. It's a thing that he actually says in that conversation, specifically about the dishes. And I just found that fascinating, particularly because of the things that come up later.
Wow. I had a totally different take.
Yeah, I'm interested in hearing it.
I think Alex is very selfish.
Mm.
And that is, and just like, I don't know, entitled, I want to say. Yeah, that I didn't like her. I mean, she doesn't seem to have accountability on like, oh yeah, her apartment is messy. It's supposed to be no big, everything she does is supposed to be no big deal. Can't we just move on?
Yeah.
And I do think he wants some accountability from her, that she responds with a lot of aggressive defensiveness when he does bring stuff up.
Yeah.
That he's like, you fell asleep. And I think that her falling asleep, yes, it was about the sleep, but it was probably symbolic and represented a general way
100%
of how Tim feels, which is Alex is going to do Alex. Alex cares about Alex.
Yeah.
And other people don't matter as much as Alex. And I think that's true. I think she does think that. And I think with the dish example, he was saying there should, if I've cooked a big meal for everybody and then I have to ask you to do the dishes, I'm not going to excuse Tim. I think he has his place of going to like I do think he goes to his dissociated frozen place where he does stonewalling, like defensiveness stonewalling, 2 of the 4 horsemen in Gottman method counseling. But there are things that like drive a relationship apart, and he freezes and goes into his stonewalling place, and he probably can't identify what it is that he needs in the moment or speak to it. And she's, whatever Alex is doing is the only thing that matters. So both of them have work to do, but definitely together it's not going to happen. And yeah, I guess I liked Tim a little bit more, but I do think it was messed up that he got permission from her dad, and it was this really tender moment when he was that uncertain.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think he has work to do on being in touch with himself.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think he can tell when his emotions at like a 9 or 10.
Mm-hmm.
But I think he needs to understand more quickly when he's actually feeling like something's not off and like not right, and be able to speak to it sooner before it gets there. Because by the time he actually comes and ends things with her, is pretty explosive. Saying I never want to see you again is pretty cruel.
Yeah, he definitely goes from asking your dad's blessing to I never want to see you again. It's a very harsh turnaround. Right. Yeah. And
I think if I could have a more, a different outcome for them, it'd be for him in the meeting the dad scenario to say to her, I'm wanting to move forward, but we just had a pretty big fight and I'm really questioning things, and it feels I would like a little bit more time before I meet your dad. And she would have been upset with that. And so he didn't want to do that. But I think the alternative is that he goes to this inauthentic place, and that is also not great. Sometimes you have to say the tough thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear that, and I agree with a lot of what you just said. Although I do think that the way you started kind of discussing him and her, specifically kind of describing her as selfish and doing things for herself, and I was like, and that's still kind of going in line with what I was saying, which is that this is the reverse of the typical dynamic that we expect, right?
True.
Where like men are kind of just like doing things just because, well, that's good for me, and doing things for themselves, and not paying attention to others, not being mindful of others and others' needs and wants, and expecting the other person to have to tell them what those needs and wants are before they're putting forward what seems like otherwise would be sort of like obvious things to do. Whether that's like Tim being like, you should clean your place, or Tim saying, you shouldn't go to sleep when my parents are here. But yeah, it breaks down real fast, you know? We go from one scene to the very, like one scene that's going really well to the very next scene, him saying, I never want to see you again.
Yeah, that's a particularly harsh way to end things.
And I
don't think I've ever said that in a breakup.
Yeah.
Even if I felt it.
And they both end up going to that reunion party.
I know, awkward.
Which is awkward. But yeah, they don't speak to each other. They only speak to you know, the men and women respectively. And that is it for yet another couple. You know, another couple bites the dust.
Yeah, rough. A little break from all that. We have
a little break, a sort of a break.
Tyler and Ashley.
We haven't. Tyler and Ashley are, you know, we start off with
a break.
Yeah, they are, and they're mostly doing fine. Now I will say that I know there's stuff going around on social media about Tyler right now, and it's a little hard to like read what's real and what's you know, rumors.
What's going on about Tyler?
I think we actually talked about it. Well, actually, we talked about it offline now that I'm realizing it. But so I guess we should move through some of this story first, which is that they're doing fine at first. Tyler meets Ashley's dad, and that goes well for the most part. Episode 9 comes around, and we find out through an intense conversation that Tyler has 3 kids that he hasn't told Ashley about. Now, a lot of the stuff that I'm seeing online is kind of referring to the way this conversation went, and specifically the fact that in episode 10 at the beginning, Tyler says that these kids, who were like his kids through a sperm donation to a couple of friends of his, he says that the kids wouldn't know what he looks like. There are photos online that seem to suggest that he hangs out with his kids often.
Yeah, what he's been trying to say is that he donated his sperm to this couple, but he's really not involved in their lives at all.
Yeah, but it just sort of, there have been a lot.
Not true.
It seems to be not true, but also it could be him and other kids. It could be his nephews. I don't know. You know, like it's hard to know.
Pictures?
Yeah, like I'm buying a narrative that I'm reading online, and I don't know how much of it is real. What I do know is that Ashley has kind of come out in his defense, in a message where she essentially only referred to Tyler as his co-star, or like didn't refer to him by anything else, which obviously doesn't really mean anything because they're probably contractually obligated to not say anything. But she was very defensive of him and said, like, you don't know, you know, stop talking out of turn. You don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
There was also some news that I saw online that Tyler has been engaged before, but we also don't necessarily know if that's something that they have addressed, you know, in their own private conversations, and that's just, you know, that hasn't made the show. Because we're still, you know, working through a very heavily edited show.
I sure hope this story he told is the right one.
Yeah, well, we can only hope, because by episode 11, they seem to have repaired most of their misunderstandings, and they seem to be en route to getting married. This. Yeah, and, you know, at the party, Ashley seems to be, you know, to kind of say, like, you know, she was caught off guard, and that this isn't, like, what she was expecting or hoping, but that, you know, they're working through it, and that they seem fairly certain.
Yeah, that part of her reaction in episode 9 was new information shock.
Yeah.
And not totally about the substance.
Yeah. And I mean, she does describe, I mean, it's a little bit ironic that she describes that their superpower is communication in the same sentence where she's then saying, also, you didn't tell me this thing.
Yeah, you and I had an interesting conversation when we were watching this, where I think you were saying if you found out that I had donated eggs or something.
No, I think I was asking about myself. Like, if you had found out that I donated sperm and I just had like kids.
Yeah. But
the
impression I got was that if it were reversed, you wouldn't care so much.
Yes. When you asked the reverse, I was like, yeah, I wouldn't care. But you said that you would care. not
Well-
not like that you would want to know, and that would affect.
Yeah, I'd want information.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd want it. I would want to know. Like, it wasn't just as blanket. And in fact, that because your response was such a blanket, no problem, it actually made me wonder if you thought about it. But when I think about it, it's like, there's so many different levels that could be at. That could mean they're your good friends. You see them occasionally. They talk to you. You're in their life. Okay. That could mean, you were a sperm donor in a bank and you've never have met these kids, and you've said in the paperwork that you don't want to be contacted, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's so many ranges that could go, and I think each one of them would have to be an adjustment for me. It'd have to be an adjustment as to, like, okay, I'm with you, and how much is being with you also being with your children? And if it is also being with your children, then that's not necessarily a deal breaker.
Yeah.
But it's something, it would be just a different mindset for me. And yeah, I mean, she's upset that he didn't tell her in the pods. She should have.
Yeah,
but
he should have. Yeah.
If indeed he's not very involved in their lives, I don't know. It's...
Yeah, and I think that the only thing that I can say is that the only experience I'm speaking of is having dated people who have had kids.
Yeah.
And almost making it, I mean, and this is maybe just me, but almost making it as a matter of principle that it should be totally fine and okay, and that I have no say in it, and ultimately if I'm into that person, I'm into that person, Yeah. And the kids have nothing to do with it. But they were also not relationships that were heading in the same direction, right? So, like, they weren't.
And I feel like the kids do have something to do with it, because in my mind I'd be making a commitment to the kids too.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'd have to be on board with that, right? Like, am I going to want to show up for their events if he shows up for their events?
Yeah.
Am I going to be okay with him taking time away from me and our kids if we have them, so that he can go spend time with his other kids?
Totally, yeah.
Am I going to feel okay about his other kids meeting our kids if we have them one day? Like, there's just a lot of... I just think it's more complex than if I'm into you, I'm into you, and that's it.
Yeah,
And
there's obviously a whole lot to think about, the actual, like, reality of it, especially when it comes to finances and time, which are finite resources.
But they do seem... They're our de facto chosen couple.
They
of
are.
This season.
They are the de facto chosen couple.
But who is not is Hannah and Nick Dorka.
Yeah, who I've, in my mind, always referred to him by first and last. I don't know why.
Yeah.
He's not just Nick to me. He's always Nick Dorka.
Yeah. I see that.
So, gosh, this arc...
There's a lot of things that happen, but there's a big theme.
There is a big theme. And the big theme... I mean, it kind of goes two ways. One is Hannah's she says it. She says it out loud in episode 7. It's my way or the highway, which is a very good indication of how she kind of feels about a lot of things, is that there are a specific way that she likes to get things done, and she expects people to do that. It's interesting, though, because later on she kind of softens on that, and she's like, she understands that not everybody does things the same way, but that she expects at least the same level of introspection and care for those things. But we begin right from episode 7 with concern from Hannah that Nick doesn't do a whole lot around the house, that he's not very handy, and that he wouldn't even take the trash out unless she said something. That he says that I'll take the trash out, and she says, like, yeah, but only if I ask you. And that's not the whole idea here, is that I shouldn't have to ask you to do things like this. We kind of come into this emotional labor, like, you shouldn't have to ask to do things that are expected to be done, And the tricky thing here is that there's aspects in this in which Hannah, I maybe this is me, but I'm like, she's also overdoing it a little. Like, I think she says she's vacuuming every day.
Yeah, that's a lot.
And I was like, come on. I know you should vacuum more often than maybe I vacuum, but that's too much. But overall, the whole sort of like arc that we're seeing here is that Nick is less than, right?
Mm-hmm. Or, yeah, Hannah thinks she's more adult than he is.
Oh, yeah, 100%. And
she's resentful of that.
And she's also latching on to every little detail that confirms that Nick isn't mature, right? So, like, when in episode 8 they visit his parents' house, which is where he lives in the basement, Hannah's, like, clearly disappointed in his space, and everything from like the pool table being covered up by boxes, and she's like, I thought you said that you have a pool table, but you're just using it like this room for storage. Or when he is trying to like, he's like, he pulls out like this little tiny buffalo, and he's like, this is my first stuffed animal named Buffy, and she just goes, okay. And I was like, oh, this is not helping the view that you are a child, in her eyes.
It's everything. Yeah, he can't cook pasta. He lives at home at all.
Yeah.
The trash thing, he doesn't know how to invest. It's all of this that she's just like, I think she's just, in her words, she just got the ick real strong. Another horseman of the 4 horsemen, the most dangerous horseman is contempt.
Yeah.
If you start to show contempt for your partner, that was like the one that that the Gottman research was like, yeah, if that happens, they're done.
Yeah.
And that happens a lot for her. She just thinks she can do better.
Yeah.
And she agreed to marry him. She likes him. She does. She probably has love for him. And so it's sort of like, can I get you there? But it's just not who she thought she'd be with, and she can't do it. And I think she's right about a lot of what I do think that she's more, good at adulting than he is. And I do think that he's got this, like, he leans really hard on his charm and has this kind of slipperiness to him.
Yeah, it's all charisma.
It's all charisma and like not as much substance. He just thinks he seems like he has to grow up. I think she's pretty mean.
Yes. So yeah, and we were talking about this right before we recorded, which is that like I rewatched some of these episodes and took some notes while just listening to the episodes a second time. And the second time when I was just listening to her, it's not that I didn't agree with things that she was saying the first time, but I 100% was like more like, man, she's mean. Whereas the second time I was like, I think she's right. She's not saying this in a very nice way, but without looking at his face, taking that, I was like, I mean, it is shitty that you can't ask him to just like boil some pasta, but he keeps being like, should it be 3/4 full? Should it be half full? Is half full okay? Like,
I also in that scene was wondering if he was just afraid of getting it wrong.
Yeah, and that is a balance when you have somebody who's like, it's my way or the highway, and then you're somebody who is, catching up on certain things that you're going to find yourself being like constantly asking, like, do you want me to do it this way?
He's afraid of her.
Yeah, and I was gonna say too, like, I think her parents and her brother also seem a little bit scared of her.
She has that effect on people.
Yeah, because when Hannah's brother comes by, they like Hannah's brother and Nick talk shit about her. They do when she's out of the room, which is ick,
by the way.
Yeah,
like,
also just wild. I didn't think that was ever gonna happen,
but like Nick, he's got that slippery, just trying to not get in troubleness to him.
Yep,
and I was really disappointed that he chooses the opportunity of meeting Hannah's brother to talk shit about Hannah. Like, it's okay, dude, you have feelings about what's going on. Fair. Not the person to talk to. That's not right.
Oh yeah.
This is not, your confidant. This is not your therapist. This is her brother. What are you doing?
I think the fact that her brother gave this like little sort of like, oh, she can be like that.
Yeah.
He
got into it. Yeah.
Yeah, he felt like he was like, oh my God, finally somebody I can talk to about this.
Yeah.
Like, oh my God, I've been trying to be just like nice and tell everybody how perfect we are this whole time. And like, by the way, sorry for that noise. That was our ice maker
I was like,
in our refrigerator. But yeah, just I think he's finally able to let loose and open up. In a way also, which does seem very kind of childish, right? It comes across as like, oh yeah, and then she was like super mean about this.
I know,
and then
she's
she was
mean
like,
mommy.
Yeah.
Oh, it sucks to be mean mommy.
Yeah.
So hard.
And
it's like you just want someone to match you.
Yeah, I mean, so episode 10 is very strong, it's filled with them in my opinion. Like it's a lot from the two of them.
They do get a lot of airtime, these two.
Yeah, I have the most notes about them. But yeah, in episode 10, she says that when they're doing like a ropes course or whatever, she says, your icks are starting to just become funny to me, which is what a weird way of going from contempt to pity. Because that's kind of what's happening. And he kind of stands up for himself and he's like, look, it's not like you said that I was stupid, but you act as though I'm a level below you, to which she responded, you get treated like an equal when you start contributing like an equal.
He didn't think he was going to get that in response. that was harsh, but kind of a little true, but also mean. Yeah. Like a mean way to say that to a person that you're supposedly like on your way to getting married with. Right. Yeah. I mean, Hannah's a very strong woman, and I want to be cognizant of like the double standard that's applied with women, and if she would be given a little bit more grace if she were a man.
Yeah.
Because she is strong, and I think she probably would be given a little bit more grace. But I also think like she's take charge. Right, she came on the show being like, I got my dream career, I got my stuff in order. She's a take charge kind of woman. I don't know if she needs someone like her, because I could see them butting heads too much, although maybe that's what she needs. But yeah, there's just too far of a gap. And Nick's way, I think if Nick actually stood up for himself more, it would actually go farther with Hannah.
Yeah. This reminded me, oh my God, I'm going to completely blank on their names, but from Love is Blind Sweden, was it Chris and Katja? Just like the sort of like you stand up for yourself more.
Yes.
But yeah, to go back to Hannah and Nick, when there's obviously a lot of talk about the mental load, about the emotional labor when there's the scene where he kind of comes home from work. And first of all, I thought it was really funny that he changes from his work clothes of a button-up shirt and pants into a different button-up shirt and pants. She calls him out for it too. But she is starting to tie up the bag, and she's like, can you take out the garbage? And then later on they're talking, and she's like, I was just like, what have you done today? And he was like, I took out the garbage. And she's like, yeah, because I just asked you to. Like, yeah, when do you do things just because you know that they need to be done?
He's taken care of at home, I assume.
He is. And we get a lot of that, right? Like that his mom cooks, that his dad wakes up to feed the cat, and that he's just he's like, I'm responsible for the cat.
Is like, oh yeah, that's not good.
But he also then says, I'm responsible for the cat. And she's like, do you feed it? No. Why would I be up at 6:30? And she's like, because you're 28 years old.
I know. Yeah. She just can't do it. Yeah. And then, can we talk about that conversation with Katie?
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about that whole party, because there's things happening on both ends at that party.
Yeah. Hannah is complaining about him and saying that he's got the sexuality of an 18-year-old, doesn't eat her pussy. He's jealous of my vibrator.
Which, oh man, guys, get over it. Can we just put that out there? Get over it. Don't be jealous of vibrators now.
I know. I encountered a couple years ago, someone who thought he was being woke by being cool with the vibrator, and I was like, whoa, I hadn't even thought that that would be a thing that a person would be upset by.
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
like, whoa, that's not woke to me. I get that it is for a lot of people. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm very pro-sex.
Yeah, well, look, in this case, Nick, this is an L for you.
This is rough.
Yeah, I mean, it's not great.
You're not going to take the trash out, and you don't eat my pussy.
Yeah, but I mean, I will also add to this the fact that he has kind of specifically told Hannah at the very beginning that he doesn't really want, just people like hearing about his sex life. Really then kind of sucks that in this context she's now putting him on blast on camera in a very public setting, and I was like, that's not very nice.
Yeah, she's got so much contempt for him.
Yeah, and like this is I'm not saying that these aren't valid reasons why you should not like him or that you might be upset with him, but the fact that she's making this public in this way is a bummer. Mm-hmm. But yeah, to the thing that you were starting to bring up, Nick talking to Katie.
Shame, Nick.
Shame, Nick.
Yeah, he's for sure flirting with her.
Hard.
And he would probably, with the duck thing, with Duckgate, it was a little more ambiguous in my mind. I could see how he thought he was being innocent. I could see how she thought he was flirting. I could also see how she was upset that even if he didn't come back, even when he could tell she was upset, regardless of whether he agreed. But this is just so blatant. And I think he's checked out of the relationship too. He's too afraid to end things.
Yeah.
But he's not trying.
Yeah, no, 100% he's testing the water with Katie. Right?
Silent. There's like a concept in couples counseling called a silent divorce, and they're not married, but like there's sort of a silent breakup happening. He's checking out.
Yeah.
I
mean, he leans in hard to that conversation with Katie by just saying like, oh, you were like one of my top choices, we had such a strong connection, I really felt for you, and like commenting on her looks, and man, Katie gives him the most, in my opinion, the most compassionate rejection, where she's just kind of like, no, you were like super nice, you're like great, but also just like there's a lot of things that you need to work on, like there's some aspects of maturity, and like you can tell that he's like deflating under it, but also, man, Katie really, like, I was like, one of the first times I was like, she's very descriptive about what she saw in him.
Yes.
And in a way that I was almost like, it's like us talking about him. Katie gave him like a very sort of like, it was like informed by her experience and by like what seemed to me like some basic knowledge of like psychology. And I thought it was like the way she spoke to him was simultaneously like rejecting him, but also being like, yeah, but like, look, there's a lot of things I think you need to work on. Like, you were just not the right choice for me. Yeah.
I was going to say I like Katie, and I think I do, but I think Hannah's right that if she's her friend, she shouldn't be talking to Nick like that. She did say they were best friends, which I was like, did you guys know each other before the show? Because if not, that's quick best friend, but that's just me throwing shade.
Look, maybe Hannah doesn't have a lot of best friends.
Yeah, I don't know. And then they both don't go to the dress fitting in the suit fitting, and then they break up.
Yeah. I mean, we also have that very awkward moment in episode 11 where Nick meets Hannah's friends.
Oh, yes.
And we find out that Hannah's the first person that Nick has loved, and I shouldn't have even like laughed there, but the truth is that like to go from never having loved someone to go into a show where you're going to get married is wild. It is. Yeah. It also speaks to his sort of like lack of life experience and development, right? Like he just needs to grow up more.
He's just a late launcher.
And when I say grow up, I don't mean that in like the sort of like, hey, grow up. Like I'm not saying,
we're not trying to be mean.
Yeah, no, I'm just legitimately saying he probably needs to move out of his parents' home to like focus on his job for a while and to focus on like things that will help him develop. And that's not to say to change him, because he also kind of points that out. He's like, I don't want to change. But some of these are just come with growing up, like the growing up of change. But yeah, I thought it was particularly telling when she was like, all I'm saying is that you should walk the dog. And like, she was like talking about some basic chores, and he responds with, I'm willing to take on these risks and challenges. And Hannah's friends are like, but those aren't risks and challenges. She's asking you to walk her dog.
Yeah. Those are basic things.
Yeah. And yeah, Hannah's already kind of got this, like
they're done.
Yeah, when she talks to her mom and says, Nick doesn't match me intellectually, he doesn't match my humor, he doesn't match me financially or creatively, and they end it. They end it at the end of on the day of the fitting. And you can also kind of tell that I think Nick has trouble accessing his own emotions. Because when she asks him, how does this make you feel? He doesn't really have an answer. I think what he says is something along the lines of, this is one of the worst feelings I've ever had. But to me, it seems like he's having a hard time connecting to those emotions, or like really understanding how he actually feels, and more saying like how he's supposed to be feeling.
There's a theme of maybe the men not knowing how to be with and access their emotions. People gotta go to therapy. Yeah. People gotta go.
You gotta go.
All
right.
You gotta go. So Taylor and Garrett.
Yeah, so Taylor and Garrett, for the most part, we're doing okay. We have, Taylor meets Garrett's parents, and Garrett's parents is clearly not okay about the whole experience. She's like crying and really kind of upset about the speed at which things are moving. But Garrett seems to be, he's talking about moving to San Diego with Taylor, and he seems very positive about things. He's okay about the fact that he's kind of leaning in and kind of giving things up for her. Meanwhile, Taylor's parents, they don't even want to be on camera. And we kind of have like
I didn't know that was an option.
Yeah.
I would totally take that option. I'm surprised more parents don't take that option.
Yeah.
You can meet and not be on camera. Okay.
I mean, I'm sure it was a difficult thing. I'm sure Netflix pushed back.
Probably.
But yeah, we that kind of does bring us to our first kind of conflict for them, or the first sort of real conflict. Specifically that Garrett's concerned that if he asks her dad for a blessing to marry her, and he says no, that Taylor would essentially just go like, well, okay, my parents said no, so we're not getting married. Which how did you feel about that? That seemed like a very tough conversation, where she's kind of just like mostly relying, like in some ways she was like, well, she didn't seem certain about how that would go, and how she would react to it.
Well, I think they even talk about this in their conversation, is that it wouldn't be about Garrett as a person. Yeah. It'd be about the circumstance. And I can understand saying no in that case. And I think that would have been a real step for them both to process, but they would have continued to date. If the reason for the no was just, this is too soon, and they still love each other as much as they seem to, then I think they would have continued to date. But yeah, it would have been really tough for both of them to get through.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that would have been rough.
And for Taylor to be in that position of being on the outside of her fam and trying to navigate everything, for Garrett to feel rejected, and then also maybe wondering how much will this be an issue in an ongoing way. There's a lot there. Yeah. But it seems like the dad does say yes. So.
The dad does seem to say yes, ultimately, when they go to San Diego in episode 11. But before that happens, we have the drama.
The fight, yes, where Garrett's ex texted him. Yeah. And if the video footage of them outside the party is the full story, then all that Garrett had shared later, like not even at the time, was that he liked her message.
Yeah.
Which is already upsetting to Taylor. She shares that she's been cheated on in the past.
Yeah.
They get to an okay enough place to go into the party, but it's still there, and they're both acknowledging that we have to get through this party, but this is not resolved. And then when they're talking with Tyler and Ashley, Garrett, in retelling the story, says he liked it, and then he actually wrote a message saying he's engaged now and they shouldn't be talking, and that really upsets Taylor.
Yeah.
That she feels like he lied.
Yeah, kept that information from
Yeah.
her. And it's clear that at least from my perspective, that he's doing it because he's afraid of, like, he's trying to prevent conflict. I'm not saying that that's okay, but I'm saying that I'm seeing that from him, that I don't think he was trying to, like, purposely, like, be shady or hide the conversation, but that he didn't want to inflame this more, right? Which is also ironic because when they were outside, Taylor specifically tells Garrett, I don't want you to just like a message or just leave it on read. I want you to actually shut it down. I want you to respond to them and say, hey, I'm engaged now. I can't be talking to you. Which it sounds like that's what he ends up doing, but
he's so out of sorts about it that it's actually hard to tell what he actually did.
Yeah. Yeah. And honestly, I don't even know if at the end of that episode, I don't think we actually know what he actually says, because when episode 11 begins, or somewhere in episode 11, when we finally catch up with them, Taylor says that they essentially spent all night, like, awake and crying and, like, talking about it, and that she kind of understands that he wasn't doing this maliciously, but that she didn't understand exactly how friendly he had been in the response. And I was like, oh, friendly. So this is maybe she has since seen that message, and it's maybe even more than what is implied.
I'm sure she asked to see the message.
Oh, yeah. But yeah, I have to say that while obviously it's not okay for him to have, like, kind of kept information and to have, like, put her in this situation, I think I do agree with the fact that I truly don't think that he had any sort of, like, I don't think he was trying to be shady.
I don't think so either.
I do think the fact that he hasn't been in a relationship in 7 years is probably a big thing that I don't think I have to admit, I don't think he considered her reaction, which is something that, it's not great, but I think it's something that it's the kind of thing that I was like, I think he can learn to be aware of, like, that kind of stuff.
I guess in a perfect world, he would have gotten the message from his ex and then consulted with her.
Yes. Yeah.
What would you like me to do?
Yeah.
I think she would have still been upset in that world, because I think gets triggered about this topic, and her upset might have been something like, your ex you're still in touch? But it wouldn't have been as intense. But yeah, I do think she goes to a trigger place, and it's all she was always guarded.
Mm-hmm.
She was always guarded. I've said this about Taylor since the jump, and this just kind of sent her into her panic place.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was probably a really awkward situation that, I don't know, do we always get it right? No. It doesn't sound like he handled it awfully. Maybe he didn't handle it the best way he could have.
Yeah.
He brought it up with her. It seems like he told her what happened. Well, he told her that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't think he was trying to hurt her. She was hurt. some of that, a lot of that is what she's bringing from her past experiences to the relationship. And some of that was his story changing, which if she's already wondering, are you trustworthy? That's not going to help. Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah. But we end with them seeming to do pretty well. I got the feeling they were headed towards Yes Town.
I think they might be. I think they there's a part of me that thinks that they might be the only couple that says yes.
You don't think Tyler and Ashley? I think Tyler and Ashley will.
I don't know. I'm being swayed by all of the stuff that I'm seeing on the internet with Tyler and Ashley, so I don't know how much more has come out. You know,
I don't follow that, but I actually appreciate that you do very much.
I mean, part of this is in all of my attempts to popularize our podcast has been just posting on different Reddits and Facebook. So I've become part of all of these groups to gather our handful of listeners who are listening to us hopefully now. Hello, listeners. Hello, my friend Tom. Hello, our friend Erica.
And our moms.
Yeah. Hello, moms. But yeah, in the end, they once we're seeing the video of Taylor's fam in San Diego, things seem to be going well. And what I liked was when they talked to Taylor's mom, and they're specifically talking about Taylor's dad. I like what her mom said, which is like, hey, I know that you don't agree with this, but she's not a child, and they've asked us to participate, so chill out. I thought that was a really nice way of addressing the situation. I was like, okay, that's really nice. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we'll see.
Yeah.
Should we move on to our last couple?
Sure, but before we do, I do have to address, he keeps mustard in the pantry.
I know.
Well, specifically, I think he highlights that it's just the yellow mustard because that's just vinegar and mustard seed.
Yeah.
And I don't know why he keeps repeating, it's just vinegar and mustard seed.
He could very well be right. There's a cultural factor. It's like when I went to Europe and I was like, you don't refrigerate eggs?
Yeah, or ketchup.
There's ways that you just grow up.
Yeah. No.
But he's a scientist, and he's like, you don't need to.
Yeah. All right.
Marissa and Ramses. Oh, so many thoughts on these two.
Marissa and Ramses. We begin with them on episode 7 already kind of in a pretty serious disagreement. Mm-hmm. In a conversation that initially starts talking about, I mean, look, they're talking about very serious things. I'll grant them that. They first talk about religion and the fact that, Marissa was a Mormon and no longer has religion in her life for good reason from her perspective. And I agree with what she's describing there, just like being presented with a white religion and being a person of color must have been really difficult. But Ramses' mom is religious and there's a little concern at first about how his mom is going to react to Marissa.
And how that will be handled in the wedding.
Yeah. And, but he doesn't seem to be that concerned about it. But where they do start to have concerns is...
her military background.
Yeah.
And Ramses is very... I want to say anti-military. I don't know if there's a different way he would put that. But he makes it clear, first of all, that if she decided to go back to the military, that would be a huge issue.
That would be a deal breaker. Yeah. It sounded like, yeah.
And it seems, I don't believe it's said outright, but he's trying to, with regards to her past military background, he doesn't want to say outright, I'm ashamed of that, or I think that you're wrong for doing that. Like, he doesn't want to say all of that, but that's what it really seems like.
Yeah.
And she feels very shamed, and like he doesn't accept her. So for her, it's very, I think that there's a disconnect because for him, he's like, I accept and love you, but I'm against this thing that for him is more abstract. But for her, it's like, it's not abstract to me. The military is a huge part of my identity.
Yeah.
And I can't not feel personal about the way that you feel.
Oh, yeah. I mean, his outward statement is, I wouldn't want anyone to be ashamed of their past, but then he keeps harping on it. And
Yes.
it keeps kind of like
Yeah.
talking about, like, you made the choice to enter. People make the choice to enter the military, so it's your fault. Ultimately, you're doing this. And for her part, she seems to be trying to minimize, her desire to be involved in the military, even though I think that were it removed from this specific context, she would maybe be speaking slightly differently. I mean, as it is, she just says, I support the troops, but I maybe don't agree with everything that they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
But there's obviously...
He seems like he doesn't support the troops.
Yeah, he does not support the
Yeah.
troops. I mean, there is clearly, with Marissa, there's clearly a little bit of cognitive dissonance that she's struggling through, because she's
Yes.
talking about very kind of, even having recently talked about joining the reserves, right? Like, so this isn't something that's like left her life. She's
Yeah.
still like potentially considering that being a thing in her life. And I think she downplays how much she kind of is considering that. And at the same time is saying, look, I'm not okay with killing people, but also I pushed the button that killed people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think she kind of says, like, I don't think I would do that again, but I also think that it's something that is still has, like, holds a huge place in her life.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that conversation does not seem to
Doesn't go well.
end well.
Yeah, she seems to be really internally struggling with it still, right?
Yeah.
That she does carry this big burden of having killed people, of having pushed the button that killed people. And I think that's why she ultimately left, right? But probably she, like many people who are in the military, sign up very young. It doesn't seem like it's this real thing. Maybe the culture, I feel like there's a huge cultural and background that you're part of where it's either very emphasized in your community or not. And we don't know what her background, I feel like they come from very different upbringings when it comes to the military.
Yeah.
And she's struggling through that. And Ramses, I don't know. Ramses in general has this comes up again later. I think he wants to believe himself like this enlightened, woke, like, I support all people, I'm just like a peaceful dude. But then the way that shows up, which is such a trope, I feel like I've seen this so much in people, is that, like, actually you're really judgmental and really like about you. Yeah, Ramses thinks, I don't think he's open to other points of view fundamentally, at least on this. I can't speak to him on every topic, but this and other stuff that comes up later, he's like pseudo empathetic.
Yeah.
It feels very false to me. He's got the whole look that he's just this grounded guy. He's probably into like tantra or something, and or at least the way we commonly understand that term here. It's much more complicated than that, really. But then in practice, it's like the things he does is minimize and shame his partner.
Yeah.
And that's not cool. Yeah. And it comes up again in episode 8 when they meet Marissa's friends.
Yeah.
Who are also veterans.
Yeah, and they're really thrown by the fact that she could be with him, right? And I think that they're confused how she can be with him, probably because they know her outside of that context, and
she's always dated military guys.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So, yeah, I 100% see how that could be something that is shocking to her friends, and also to be like, how do you think that you can be dating him if like you disagree with such a basic aspect of
and
her?
what will you teach your kids is a good point that her friends bring up that I don't think they thought about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, that's a rough start. And then we go to the meeting with Marissa's family.
Yeah.
And her mom is a very strong woman.
Ooh, that is one way of putting it. She's a
That's the way I put it.
She's a scary lady. She directly threatens him.
Yeah.
Which, hey, power to you for protecting your daughter, but also it was scary when she was, I will cut your balls off.
She's picking up on his falseness, right? Like she got that down on lock, but she's not looking to like either. He's coming in guilty until proven innocent.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, her siblings seem to like him, but yeah, her mom is doesn't like him.
She's not easy.
And interestingly, I didn't expect this, but Marissa kind of backs him.
Yeah. Well, I think she's been dealing with her mom being overbearing her whole life. And Marissa is like, okay, come on, chill out. Yeah. But the mom says you should do a prenup, which they absolutely should. Everybody on the show should do a prenup.
Yeah, I would be like, I think we talked about it previously, but I would be surprised if Netflix doesn't enforce it. But maybe they don't. I don't know. But yeah, he has absolutely no problem with a prenup. Marissa's like, don't tell me what to do. I don't think she has like any problems with the actual prenup. I think she's just mad that her mom told her that this is a condition.
Exactly. She doesn't want to, she wants to make it clear that if they do that, it's not going to be because her mom says.
Yeah.
Yeah. It seems like Marissa's had to do a lot of boundary setting.
Yeah.
I'll say.
Yeah. And I mean, look, for Marissa and Ramses, things keep just
go
going
from bad to worse.
Poorly.
Yeah.
Because the next conversation they're having is about Marissa saying that she wants kids sooner. Ramses wants to wait at least 3 years, and Marissa is kind of rightfully kind of doing the math and being like, look, I think it's a better idea for me to have kids when I'm younger.
Mm-hmm.
And which immediately then flows right into the conversation where she initially kind of says like, oh, I guess I should go talk to my doctor about birth control, and then kind of stops and goes like, I don't want to go back on birth control.
Yeah.
And Ramses is like, what do you want us to do? Use condoms? And she's like, yeah. And he's like,
yeah, I don't want to do that.
I don't want to do that
in my marriage. What a divisive conversation this one is, huh? I feel like I'm definitely interested in what listeners think. I'm going to own, I don't know if we're going to get this one. I think we're going to upset people no matter what we say about this conversation.
I mean, first of all, there are options for male birth control.
That was a huge part of the conversation that was missing.
Yeah. So like the fact that he's like, well, you either get birth control or we use condoms, which I hate because it makes sex feel bad for me. The fact that he doesn't consider any alternatives,
right,
is wild to me. Because there are alternatives, and man, sex education in this country is lacking. But yeah, there are options. Both, I mean, there is a few things that are kind of coming up now for actual like chemical birth control. But he like, especially if he's like, I don't want kids for a few years, get a snip. Get you a snip.
Or you could try the female condom. That might feel different.
Yeah, there's options. In other words.
Yeah. But it's more of this, again, like he's torn because he's like, well, I want to respect a woman's choices and like I should do that because that's the person I think I am. But I also am really going to pressure her to have sex without a condom. I hated this conversation. I'm just going to say, like, the one, if you take marriage out of the equation, I felt upset with him kind of on behalf of all women who've been pressured to have sex without a condom or any way that they don't want to have sex, because enough of that. The only thing that gave me a little pause on that was like, okay, marriage ups the ante on everything. And I don't know if it really is a thing. Yeah, maybe you don't want to have sex for 3 years with a condom. I don't know. I'm trying to give him a little bit of grace here, but I have to admit this conversation was activating for me, and it made me really upset with Ramses. But I think I'm bringing some of my own experience to the table.
I wouldn't necessarily say that you're bringing, like, this conversation for me was maybe eye-opening in a way that, eye-opening about Ramses, I should say, eye-opening to me maybe in a way that it shouldn't have been, as in, like, maybe I should have seen it earlier. But it was, to me, one of those moments where I was like, you seem to pass yourself off as being kind of like this very progressive and liberal and feminist person, and like, and when the rubber hits the road, no pun intended, you're like, no rubbers, please.
He wants the rubber to hit the road.
And I'm like,
that was pretty good.
Yeah, that was pretty good. I gotta give you props. But yeah, just like the fakeness of his attitudes and like of his worldview kind of very suddenly hit me, and I was like,
yeah,
what? Like, how dare you?
He's someone who would, I think, self-identify as a feminist, but is not a feminist.
Yeah, exactly. Like that conversation. Yeah, it is. Yeah, it was very frustrating.
Yeah.
It was very like frustrating to
so upsetting
to have to put up with what I was like. Get yourself out of here with your bullshit and go get a vasectomy. If that's so important to you that you don't have a kid, get a vasectomy. You can unsnip it if need be later on.
In general, with this conversation too, I found that the way they had of communicating with each other was so roundabout and like not drawing conclusions. Like, well, I don't want kids and I don't want to use condoms, so sort of
you
like,
better
figure it out.
So you better do something.
And hers is like, well, I don't want to go on birth control and I don't want to have kids, so but they're both like doing that little dance with each other, and I would have loved it if they were just like, this is an issue, how are we going to address it? But they I think they're both trying to be like, or him for sure is trying to be like this more who he thinks he should be, and she's always had that to her where she just, you know, laughs and has more trouble speaking up for what she actually is feeling.
Yeah,
she ultimately does.
That back and forth also doesn't end, because she then goes like, I think condoms is what we should do, and then he asks the question, well, have you even ever had good condom sex? Instead of seeing like, hey, I personally don't think it's that great. He's like, what, is there even such a thing as good condom sex? And she's like, I've had some of the best sex I've ever had has been condom sex. And he's like, well,
not
okay,
me.
That's not what I hoped to hear.
And you know, and I guess I want to just say too, being on the same page about sex is really important
in a marriage.
Yeah. And so even though I don't like how he's responding, I guess I want to put it out there that like, it's valid that he considers this important when considering marriage. It's valid that he's thinking about what will our sexual dynamic be.
Yeah.
Even though there's a lot I'm disliking about this.
Yeah. To that point, I think it is important to note that, like, any conversation that we're seeing here, which might seem one way or another in a typical relationship, as, you know, like people having a conversation inside their relationship, is not only, you know, has its ante upped by the fact that they're on a show, but also that they have this like time limit to a marriage, to a very, like, you know, to a very important deadline. And, you know, this comes up again in the next episode, because ultimately, you know, Ramses is still concerned about the kids' conversation, and he's further concerned about the fact that he tried to initiate sex and she refused him because she's sick and on her period. And he takes that as like, he's concerned that that's just how things are going to be. That I think really what he's thinking is that when we have a disagreement, you're going to like pull away from me and our relationship is going to become distant. And she's trying to be like, I'm sick, I'm on my period, and I don't feel great, and I just need some space. And he is not doing a great job at giving her space in that
he's
scene.
like, but how about not space though?
Yeah. This is I think an instance in which, like, if he had like if he had a camera showing him what we are seeing of the two of them,
he'd probably cringe at himself.
He'd probably go like, oh Jesus, like look at her face, she just wants me to step away, and I'm just
trying
like,
to make her yogurt.
Yeah, and I'm just like clinging onto her for like my own like edification, to feel better about myself and to feel okay about what we're doing.
Yeah.
So not great, not a great look.
I wonder if in general him watching the show will prompt reflection.
One can only hope.
Same episode, we see that they meet. She meets Bohdan. It's totally friendly. It was like zero drums.
Zero drums, zero. I mean, I think it was helped by the fact that, like, you know, ultimately Bohdan and Ramses are such close friends. Yeah. So they have these like kind of friend vibes all together. I mean, look, we talking about thruples.
Someone really didn't like our thruple conversation, my thruple comments.
Yeah, somebody didn't like the thruple conversation. They said that...
They said that you should leave me.
Oh, I would never leave you for...
Anytime you talk about sex or relationships, people are going to have comments. I stand by my tongue-in-cheek thruple comments, and I also appreciate that someone shared feedback that they didn't like it.
And I stand by
their rights to share that feedback.
And I definitely stand by you in that throuple conversation.
Yes. But if you did ultimately leave, I would hope that it would be for Freddie.
Oh, to be with Freddie. Yeah.
Yes, this is a UK thing.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have rough conversations about military, rough conversations about birth control and sex, and she sort of later is like, oh, I was on my period, la la, which, you know, that's true. A lot of people do have really intense reactions to period, but I also think they're trying to smooth things over.
Yeah.
And then in the last episode, they're on the hot tub boat, which looks awesome. I totally want to go on the DC hot tub boat. And the theme, our old friend, emotional labor, shows up.
Yeah. Specifically, it starts off with regards to like wedding planning. And she's like, look, I understand that if I tell you to work on the registry, you'll work on the registry. I understand that if I tell you to work on the band, you'll work on but you know, I don't
want to have to tell you that.
I don't want to have to tell you that, because it's things that I'm doing for the both of us, and I'm doing it because I'm thinking that it needs to be done, and you should also be thinking that it needs to be done, but you're waiting for me to tell you to do it because otherwise you're assuming that I'm going to do it. And he's like, well, if we don't want to slip into that, you know, typical male thing. And she's like, you are doing that exact thing. Like, you are, in fact, doing it. And I genuinely don't recall how that conversation ends, other than the fact that they are overall seeming to enjoy their hot tub date. But what I do know is that when the episode ends, we end with Ramses expressing doubt about things, about everything that's happening, everything from the sex life kind of not working out exactly like he'd hoped to to, probably every conversation that they've been having over the last few episodes.
And honestly, she should be having this same doubt. If they're not airing it, I hope she's having it. This is too many things.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think they're going to be a no. So we officially think what? We think Taylor and Garrett are yes.
Yeah.
Tyler and Ashley, I think yes. You think no?
I think no.
Do we think any other yeses?
No.
No.
I don't.
Well, because I guess Ramses and Marissa are the only couple left.
Yeah. Hey, by the way, since we've spoken about emotional labor, as a person with a therapy background, do you have any books or reading that may be helpful to our readers?
I sure do.
Really?
Yes, this is a book that came out, I don't know, last year, the year before. It's called Fair Play. It's by Eve Rodsky. And she did like a comprehensive look at the mental load, I think she would call it, in relationships, and breaks down how people. There's a book. There's also a card game couples can play. I'm not sponsored by her. I would love to be sponsored by her. I did do a training on the Fair Play method, but where it looks at how it's not just like there's 3 components to every task. There's not just the execution, which is where mostly men, although it's not always, the gender divide does not always break down like that. And this can happen in same-sex couples too, or throuples, I'm sure. But it, zooming out, it tends to be talked about in terms of men. Focus on the execution component of a task, and women get tasked with the conceptualization and planning parts of a task, as well as the execution of some tasks, and that the conceptualization and planning are unseen mental labor, and men
often
out.
Men often want credit for the execution.
Yes.
They demand for credit, like, well, I did it. Didn't you see how I did it? Why didn't you thank me for doing it?
Right. And women are like, because you're not seeing this other component, which is I had to tell you to do it.
Yeah.
So it's a really interesting, the training was really interesting. I'll be reading the book, and maybe getting the card game. But yeah, if you're looking for something that breaks down in so many words what you may have been feeling internally, and for men too, because I do think it's probably really confusing to feel like I did what you asked, why are you still mad at me? And so it's really illuminating to see the other side of like, oh, I didn't even realize there were these other components to it, and now I understand, and now I can address them. So yeah,
well, thank you for that.
but that is our hot take on 7 to 11 weddings tomorrow.
Weddings tomorrow. Oof. Well,
And
we will find out.
You'll get our thoughts on them. If you liked us, or if you got an emotional reaction from listening to this that compels you to write a 5-star review, please do that. Even if it's not like, if it's less than 5 stars, please journal about it, but don't write it publicly.
Journal about it.
Please express your emotions.
Also, if you make it to the end of the episode, say hello in some fashion.
Yay!
Yeah, I'm always curious. Do people listen to these episodes to the end? Maybe you don't. Maybe you do. I don't know. But if you do, say hi.
Say hi. The code word is mental load.
The code word is mental load. Just everybody starts commenting mental load.
That'd be awesome. I would actually love that.
Okay.
So, we'll see you soon.
We will see you when we see you, or you'll see us, or you'll hear us. Okay. Bye-bye.